we are joined by Axel Weber. He is the chairman of UBS. He's here in Berlin for a women's conference. But of course, given the sensitive news, Axel Weber, first of all, welcome to the program. But I think we need to start to talk a little bit about terrorism and the impact that this will have on Europe. Unification or disunification?
Well, it's another devastating event, and my thoughts are with the families and with the victims of this event. It's just that, unfortunately, terrorism has become part of European reality. And we've seen that in the past markets have reacted to such events, but the reaction has been muted and it has been transitory. So I pretty much expect, as sad as all of this is, that the markets will be unsettled for a while. I don't expect a big move in markets today as a result of that. Currencies are probably the area, and the British pound is something where markets will focus. What is the reaction of the UK to this? And I think this will strengthen the hand of those that basically say we have to secure our borders and we have to make sure that we live in a safe environment.
We're still trying to find out news. So again, it may be a little bit too premature to exactly understand what happened, but will it have an impact on Brexit negotiations at all?
No, but I think it basically there has been an underlying current in many European economies with sort of rise of nationalism, and these events very often add to that sentiment of insecurity. And unfortunately, we don't know yet what the reason for that was, but it led to that sentiment. I don't think it will have a straight impact on negotiations or negotiating strategy, but I think it's just another example of very strong feed for national sentiments.
Do terror threats and terrorist attacks actually have an impact on consumer confidence?
I think in a transitory way they do affect confidence in general. But I think in the medium to long term, they're more challenging for what is the political response to this and how will policymakers deal with this. And that's going to be the focus rather than the reaction to the event.
Is it too soon to say whether this has an impact on German elections? I know it's quite a far time away. We know that in the UK, where we're about 2.5 weeks from the election, campaigning has been suspended. Again, is there any read across from that?
I think we've seen in the past with the unfortunate events in Paris about 2 years ago and the events here in Germany around Christmas, it does have a transitory effect, as I said. I don't think it will have an impact on the election campaign in Germany in the sense that, there are many parties that have already addressed the issue of internal security and securing the perimeters of the European Union on migration policy. So I think all of these discussions are in place. It's just another data point that adds to the severity of having to come to a conclusion, and there be a pressing need by populations to ask for policymakers to deal with this.
Axel Weber, the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, yesterday was talking about the cheap euro and the impact that was having on the surplus, and she was blaming the cheap euro, in her own words, as, I guess, a side effect of ECB monetary policy. What do you make of that?
It was probably more an explanation rather than a blame, because Germany has been on the receiving side of many comments about its trade surplus and its current account surplus, and it's one of the countries that has among the largest trade and current account surplus. But of course, almost mechanically, as a result of the monetary union, where Germany is one of the strongest members, the average of the European Union, which is reflected in the euro trading, is weaker than Germany as an economy. And so if Germany in isolation would probably have a stronger currency. For me, a good approximation of a shadow German economy has always been the Swiss franc. Right. And if you see how the Swiss franc has strengthened over the years and how Switzerland had difficulties in dealing with a stronger franc, which is overvalued at this point in terms of exports, you can see that a stronger currency puts pressure on exports, but at the same time, it has helped in the past to preserve stability. And I think corporates that have to adjust to a challenging environment in the foreign exchange market are usually the ones that do reform and gear their competitive much faster. So I think a strong currency does have some advantages. But of course, it's a challenge also for exporters.
So do you think this is a rhetoric from also German government to try and push for the next European Central Bank president to be a German, and what would it look like?
I think this is way too early. I think this is a debate. Mario Draghi is, in the ECB for another 2.5 years. I don't think it is useful to discuss succession at this stage, and I think it's very important that the ECB continues to do its work, that everyone is focused, and that we're starting to see the exit from this unusual, unorthodox monetary policies. And my expectation is that we'll see that over the course of next year. The ECB is more or less pre-committed its hand for this year, but there'll be some removing of biases in the forward guidance. There'll also be a program discussion around September on what they will do in the next year, the tapering of its purchases. So I think that policy is going to kick in over the rest of the year, and it's very important that the ECB strongly leads that, and that the president is in good contact with the market and prepares markets for that, because we've seen what happened in the US when markets weren't well prepared for a tapering announcement. So it's very important that at this stage the ECB president is seen to be in fully command, and successions debates should be had when the time's right.
Are you concerned that actually they start normalizing policy a little bit too soon, given that Italy is still really on the brink, you could say, and that there's a lot fewer euro support than there was 3 years ago, and also we had a little bit of noise from Spanish elections?
Sure, but I think the ECB, as much as that policy that we're on now was appropriate 10 years ago when the crisis started, we'll soon have the 10th anniversary of this crisis. So I think that policy looks increasingly out of place. And both the purchases but also the negative interest rates, I think, will be removed over time. The US has, ahead of the Europeans in terms of moving and normalizing interest rates. I think the Europeans cannot completely isolate from that. The long end has moved up with the US rates. And I think the ECB would be wise if by the end of this year they would start to scale back their support for the economy. The European economy is strong. You just saw the German data come out again today. European economy is doing quite well. I was in the Netherlands last week, where growth has been very, very strong, almost twice as strong as in Germany. So I think the European economy increasingly is driven by consumption and by sustainable developments, and that's the time when you need to scale back monetary policy support.
How would you rate the Donald Trump first foreign trip so far? A success or wait and see?
I think it's an important outreach to the region, in particular. If you look at the Middle East, there was a strong feeling, I was in the Middle East just a few weeks ago, that the region has not, had the support by the American president under the Obama administration that is required in order to secure the orderly developments in the region. There's many conflicts, geopolitical tensions, there's the Syria conflict. So I think it is very good that in the foreign policy priorities that the US president chose that region as the first region to visit.
When he comes back home, he'll probably be greeted by more memos and possible leaks from the FBI. Does that make him a lame duck? And if he is, what impact does that have on Fed policy?
No, I don't think it makes him a lame duck. He's just in office just over 100 days. But I think there is challenges around the transition, and I think it is a new president that has not been a long-time political person, and therefore getting used to the ins and outs of Washington and how you run government as opposed to how you run an election campaign will still be dominating the agenda when he's back in the US.
Will it play in currency markets? Are we going to see a lot more volatility there play out?
The U.S. is a very strong, has a very strong dollar at the moment. I think the U.S. continues to be strong. What helps the currency markets is really the outlook that the Fed will continue to normalize. At the moment, I do see the Fed that they're looking for reasons not to change their course of continuing rate hikes. And the U.S. financial markets are strong. Global money is pouring back into the U.S. You see emerging markets and many others invest in U.S. equity. So I think the U.S. economy is strong, and the dollar is largely going to be driven by the economy. I think there is always concerns when there are major political disruptions, but at this stage the market has got used to that. There was some repricing of the early Trump reflation trade that has come down a bit, and we've seen the dollar adjust to that. But I think now the dollar is pretty fairly priced and looks to be strong in the future.